There's a stretch of severe weather rolling across the middle of the country right now that's a lot more dangerous than the average summer thunderstorm complex, and if you live anywhere from the Dakotas to the Ohio Valley, this is one you need to know about before you head out the door. Overnight, a cluster of storms fired up near the western border of North Dakota and South Dakota, and it's grown into what forecasters expect to become a significant mesoscale convective system, essentially a large, organized cluster of thunderstorms that moves as one unit rather than breaking apart. The Storm Prediction Center has an enhanced risk in place across parts of South Dakota, southwestern Minnesota, and northwestern Iowa, with a broader slight risk extending from the northern and central plains all the way into the Ohio Valley. The main hazard isn't hail or tornadoes this time, it's wind. Forecasters are calling for a severe wind swath capable of producing gusts of 75 miles per hour or higher in spots, which is strong enough to snap trees, down power lines, and cause structural damage. Here's why this system is behaving the way it is. It's developing within a corridor of strong atmospheric instability paired with favorable deep-layer wind shear, and that combination is what allows storms to organize into a long-lived line rather than fizzling out individually. As this line pushes eastward through the overnight and early morning hours, it's expected to track across much of the Ohio Valley and into western Pennsylvania and West Virginia, meaning communities that are asleep when this arrives could be waking up to a very different scene than when they went to bed. Damaging straight-line winds remain the primary concern along this path, though isolated large hail is possible as well. By the way, if you'd like specific weather forecasts for your region or city, please leave them in the comments. I'll answer them individually as time allows. Also, if you like the video and subscribe to my channel, you'd be very grateful. Now, let's move on. If you're in eastern Iowa specifically, pay close attention to your morning commute today. Storms are expected to reach the northwestern counties of the region between roughly 5 and 6 in the morning, with exact timing depending on where the storms initially form and how quickly they accelerate eastward. These storms are moving fast, in some cases 50 miles per hour or faster, which means the window between storms are approaching and storms have arrived can shrink very quickly. That speed is actually part of what's driving the wind damage potential, because fast-moving lines like this are efficient at transporting strong winds down to the surface. Now here's where things get interesting for anyone hoping this clears out fast. This isn't a one-and-done event. The active pattern responsible for tonight's system is expected to stick around for several more days, running from tonight through the upcoming weekend, with additional rounds of showers and storms cycling through, some of which could again reach severe limits. Thursday stands out in the current guidance as the day with the highest overall chance for renewed storm activity, and like tonight's system, it's likely to favor the late night and early morning hours over the afternoon. That repeated cycle of storms creates a second hazard that's just as important as the wind threat: flooding. The Weather Prediction Center has flagged a slight risk of excessive rainfall for parts of the Midwest and Ohio Valley today, and that risk reappears again Thursday into Friday across a corridor stretching from the mid-Missouri Valley through the Ohio Valley and into the High Plains. When storm after storm tracks over roughly the same corridor, the ground simply can't absorb it all, and runoff starts pooling in low-lying areas, creeks, and poor drainage neighborhoods even when no single storm looks especially extreme on its own. Current guidance suggests some areas could pick up 2 to 5 inches of rain by the end of the weekend, depending on exactly where the heaviest storm tracks set up. And that range comes with real uncertainty since small shifts in track can mean the difference between a soaking and a genuine flash flood concern. Let's dig into the setup driving all of this a bit more, because understanding the upstream pattern helps explain why forecasters have relatively high confidence in an active week rather than just a single overnight event. A mid-level ridge is forecast to move eastward through the north-central United States on Thursday and shift into the Great Lakes region by Friday. Ridges like this don't produce storms on their own, but they help define where the boundary between hot, humid air to the south and cooler air to the north sets up, and that boundary, often called a moist axis, is where repeated rounds of thunderstorms tend to fire. Right now, that moist axis is forecast to remain roughly in place from the Central Plains southeastward into the lower Ohio Valley, which is exactly why the same general corridor keeps showing up in the severe and flooding guidance day after day this week. There's also a shortwave trough factor worth mentioning, since it explains Friday's severe potential specifically. As the ridge shifts into the Great Lakes, a mid-level shortwave trough, essentially a smaller disturbance riding along within the larger pattern, is forecast to move through the northern plains and mid-Atlantic on Friday, which could spark an additional round of severe thunderstorms in both of those separate areas. Saturday brings yet another shortwave trough, this one tracking through the Great Lakes region directly, with moderate to strong instability expected to build over Illinois, Indiana, and Ohio by afternoon. That's 3 separate disturbances moving through a 5-day window, each capable of triggering its own round of severe weather layered on top of the daily instability already present along that moist axis. There's a separate piece of this pattern playing out far to the southwest that's worth mentioning too, because it's connected to the same broader atmospheric setup. Across Arizona and into southern New Mexico, monsoon moisture has been running well above normal, and the Weather Prediction Center has also flagged a slight risk of excessive rainfall there today. This is expected to be one of the last strong monsoon moisture days in that region for now, as an upper-level trough lifts northeastward and pulls the atmospheric moisture down with it, with little replenishment expected overnight Thursday. If you're in central or southern Arizona, that means today carries the better chance for locally heavy downpours and possible flash flooding in the usual monsoon trouble spots, arroyos, urban low points, and areas near recent burn scars, before things dry out somewhat behind the departing trough. If you live in the path of tonight's system, from the Dakotas through Iowa, Illinois, Indiana, and into Ohio, western Pennsylvania, and West Virginia, this is the part of the forecast you need to watch closely overnight and into the early morning. Have a way to receive warnings while you sleep, because a fast-moving wind event like this often arrives with limited daylight lead time. A weather radio or a phone with wireless emergency alerts enabled is genuinely the difference between waking up to a warning and waking up to the storm itself. It's also worth understanding what makes wind damage from a system like this different from what people often picture when they think severe weather. There's no need for a tornado to cause significant destruction here. A sustained line of thunderstorms producing widespread 60 to 75 mile-per-hour gusts can flatten crops across huge swaths of farmland, take down mature trees that have stood through decades of ordinary storms, and knock out power to tens of thousands of customers across a multi-state area, all without a single funnel cloud ever forming. That kind of widespread wind damage, sometimes called a derecho when it covers enough distance and duration, tends to get less attention in the moment than a tornado warning, but the cumulative impact across the affected corridor can be just as significant. For farmers and anyone with outdoor property in the path of this system, now is the time to secure loose equipment, outdoor furniture, and anything else that could become airborne in gusts of this strength. If you're in an area with mature trees near your home, it's worth thinking through where you'd move to if you heard one of those trees start to shift in high wind, since that kind of structural failure can happen with very little additional warning once winds cross that 60 to 70 mile-per-hour threshold. There's also a meaningful difference in how this threat plays out depending on which part of the corridor you're in, and it's worth understanding rather than treating this as one uniform event stretching from the Dakotas to West Virginia. Across the plains and into Iowa, the primary concern tonight is the wind swath itself, arriving with a fast-moving, well-organized line that gives relatively short lead time once it's identified on radar. Farther east, across Illinois, Indiana, and Ohio, the system will have had more time to interact with daytime heating and instability by the time it arrives, which can either strengthen the line further or cause it to weaken and become more broken depending on exactly how much energy remains available in the atmosphere at that point. That's part of why forecasters describe the Ohio Valley portion of tonight's system with slightly more uncertainty than the Dakotas and Iowa portion, even though both fall within the broader risk area. The repeated nature of this pattern also means the flooding risk compounds differently depending on antecedent soil conditions in each location. Areas that have already seen above normal rainfall over the past couple of weeks, generally across parts of the upper Midwest, are more vulnerable to flash flooding from any additional heavy rain, since the ground has less remaining capacity to absorb runoff before it starts pooling or flowing into streams and rivers. Areas that have been running drier, more typical of parts of the Central Plains, have somewhat more buffer before flooding becomes a serious concern, though a slow-moving or repeatedly training line of storms can overwhelm even relatively dry ground if enough rain falls in a short enough window. This is exactly why the National Weather Service issues flash flood warnings based on rainfall rate and recent conditions rather than a single fixed rainfall threshold that applies everywhere equally. Local National Weather Service offices across the affected corridor, from Aberdeen and Sioux Falls in South Dakota through the Quad Cities in Chicago down into Louisville and Cincinnati, will be the best source for real-time warnings as this system and its successors move through over the coming days. Their forecasts will sharpen considerably as each individual round of storms gets closer, since the exact placement of the moist axis and the timing of each shortwave trough carries more uncertainty 3 to 5 days out than it does within a 12 to 24-hour window. The bigger picture here is a pattern that's staying locked in an active, storm-prone setup for the rest of this week, with the corridor from the plains through the Ohio Valley taking the brunt of it, both from repeated severe wind threats and from the flooding risk that comes with storm after storm tracking over the same ground. Saturday brings another wrinkle, with a shortwave trough expected to move through the Great Lakes region and moderate to strong instability building over Illinois, Indiana, and Ohio by afternoon, which keeps that severe threat alive even as we push toward the weekend. Confidence is reasonably high on the overall pattern holding through Saturday based on current model agreement, though the exact placement of each individual round of storms within that corridor will keep shifting day to day as the atmosphere fine-tunes itself. So keep checking back for updates rather than assuming today's exact forecast holds unchanged through the entire week.